Hey, I really didn't feel like setting up the studio and doing a full video and all. I've been pretty busy with the release of Advanced Contact. It's really been, between the day job and trying to, work on advertising for that and just trying to keep my social media presence going to keep it, as up in front of people as I can. It's just I'm beat, man. But I did think I wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of thank everybody. Now, I don't want to go through and name names because I know inevitably I'll forget somebody, and then I'll be in trouble. But this book couldn't have happened without the help of so many people. In fact, I do kind of want to go over the story of how this book came to be. And I know I've mentioned the part about the article, or it was a video of Jimmy Carter saying that if he had it to do over again, he would have sent an extra helicopter on Eagle Claw. And that really did get me to thinking about, well, wouldn't it have been interesting to see how that operation, what would that have looked like if that operation had been successful? Um, and and yeah, that really was where this started. And I thought to myself, I've always wanted to write. I've always wanted to be a writer, and it's that follow through is I think the obstacle that so many people run into. And so instead of setting out to write this big long novel, I really honestly started out to writing 30,000 words on a successful eagle claw, and that's really where it started from. In fact, if you I like my video effects, if you go and you're reading it, you might notice that the writing is, I think personally, considerably better on those embassy scenes where Howard Chandler is trying to survive, compared to the later scenes where it's the actual eagle claw, and that's because those eagle claw scenes were written first. And so, and don't get me wrong, they went through tons of editing. That was where most of the editing obviously had to come in from the places that I wrote first, or the scenes that I wrote first. So Eagle Claw was first. The second thing that I wrote was basically a 20,000 word short story on the invasion of Afghanistan. Pieces and parts of that made it into Advanced Contact. It was originally kind of a wholly self-contained story, but beginning, middle, and end. And now instead, it's really an introduction to some characters that we're going to continue following. And it was really important to me to show the Soviets, the soldiers themselves anyway, as just normal people. There's a very strong correlation between Misha's squad and Carlos's squad. Um, they're men out there doing their job to the best of their ability. They have people back home. They have personal lives. They have opinions. Some and in the military you generally don't get to express those, even in ours. So I just wanted those characters to be real. I didn't want my Soviets to be just bloodthirsty Ivans that are going through drinking vodka and shooting everybody down. So that's one of the reasons why I did the invasion of Afghanistan as the second part of the story. And throughout all that, I was of course writing up the political scenes. And in fact, I will tell you, when Miranda first read the manuscript, the notes that she had were a little brutal. And there was a ton of the political discourse that got yanked out of there. On the Soviet side, there was I don't know if I was trying to write a paper for my bachelor's degree, but yeah, there was a deep dig into the history of the Soviet government, going back to as far back as Khrushchev. So a lot of that got pulled out. There were scenes that were consolidated. So I had a scene. I had two scenes, one of which was Harold Brown talking to, you know what, actually, now that I think about it, those might have gone back in, but they were cut down. One was Harold Brown talking to Zbigniew Brzezinski, and the other one was Cyrus Vance talking to him. And I might have kept both of them and trimmed them down. Yeah, so there was an awful lot of that, the political stuff, the boardroom meetings, and the obviously there's still plenty of it in the story. Don't get me wrong, But I definitely think that when I was first writing the story, I felt like, oh, you have to make sure everybody understands that you're a smart guy and you know what you're talking about. And yeah, nobody wanted to read that. Or again, I was telling a buddy of mine, Mike, that there's like 0.004% of my readership that really are going to regret missing that part of the story. But that was the genesis of it. Was okay. We wrote this one short story. We were kind of melding it into this second short story. Let's take it a step further, and that's when we or I came up with the idea of expanding it into the beginning of a whole global conflict. And it was, how do I get there? What would it take to make this work? And I mentioned in the FAQ video that one of the reasons that I chose 1980 was because it was the time in which I felt the Soviet Union had its best chance. It was, well, the Americans were still mired in, their military equipment being from the Vietnam War. They hadn't gotten their new operate or weapon systems online yet. So the Soviets were on technical parity, or in some cases, like with the BMP, they had a technological advantage. So that was really why I grabbed that, and I think it really it made it a lot easier for me to write this. And again, because we don't see this era very often. I've seen a lot where it's happening in later years. You see some where it's happening Korean War time frame. I've seen some where it's 1947 and or the extension of World War II. We just keep going. We don't stop when when the Germans capitulate. Instead, we just turn our targets around on the Soviets. So I hadn't seen the late 70s, early 80s. And I think I mentioned it before, even General Hackett's book, which was written, I think, in 79, it actually takes place in around 87. So this seemed like it was kind of wide open space for me. And that's what I did. And I think one of the things that I don't want to say I regret it, but one of the disadvantages to writing an alternate history story from so close to the point of departure is that you don't get to play around as much with the history, what happened. And I guess it's cool that you get to build it as you go, but I think there's something to be said for having that distance and just being able to explain, like, for example, the history as history instead of as contemporary time. And I think if you watch the show For All Mankind, they do a real good job with that. In the first season, they're really close to the point of departure. In the second season, they leap 10 years ahead. And then in the third season, they leap 10 years ahead. And so they are able to backfill a lot of that stuff in dialogue, or they like to drop scenes in between the seasons, or at the beginning of each new season, which kind of catches you up to some of the historic events that were different and how they played out. And I thought that was really cool. But I didn't get to do a lot of that in Advanced to Contact. You will start seeing more of it in Fire and Maneuver, the second book of the series. In this one, my favorite, and if you haven't read the book, this is kind of a mild spoiler, but the big one that I pulled two, I think, that were really big. Well, there's a third one that I'm not going to spoil, but the first one was to have Jeane Kirkpatrick replace Cyrus Vance as the Secretary of State. I don't know how many people remember Jeane Kirkpatrick, but she was originally, or in our timeline, she was Ronald Reagan's ambassador to the United Nations. But what I didn't know at the time, growing up as a kid, I thought, oh yeah, this lady's great. She's hardcore. What I didn't know was that right up until around 1980, she was a staunch Democrat, and it was the Carter administration that drove her to the Republican Party. And so by 1984, she was giving the keynote speech at the Republican National Convention. So that was how hard Jimmy Carter's administration hurt her or pushed her. And so I thought, she's an absolute lion, and to be able to grab her and get her on the ticket in place of Vance, who I'm sure he was a nice guy, but really didn't have the backbone for the job, in my opinion, obviously. This would be a win-win. And then with that, putting the first female Secretary of State, and I will fight you if you try to tell me that she wasn't qualified or that in any way, shape, or form that was some kind of PC move on my part. No, that lady deserved it, and that administration really could have used it. That her input could have saved them a lot of embarrassment on the foreign policy stage if she had been there in place of Cyrus Vance from the beginning. So that was the first real, big shift that I made, besides the rescue of the hostages. Actually, and you know what? Let's talk about that real quick. I love it that in the book, the hostage rescue is a success. And this, again, spoilers. If you haven't read the book, you might want to come back after you do. The hostage rescue is a massive success. 13 hostages were killed, but in that timeline, that's a massive success. In our timeline, yeah, the rescue failed, and there were casualties, there were deaths, but none of the hostages died. All of the hostages were released. So, was it a success? It was, because it was about more than the lives of the hostages. It was about America's place in the world, and it was about not negotiating with terrorists and ensuring that they understood, if you take American hostages, we'll kill you. And that was a big part of the debate between Cyrus Vance and Zbigniew Brzezinski, was if you negotiate with the terrorists, you're just encouraging every other radical group to take more hostages. So that's absurd. And to go back to historical events that were kind of flipped on their ear, I went ahead and, because of, or partially, there were kind of two sides to this, adding Jeane Kirkpatrick to the cabinet was kind of a catalyst for pushing forward the Equal Rights Amendment. So this is really complicated on its own. I could do a whole video on what happened to the ERA, especially in the late 70s, early 80s. But that fight was a real close one, and it really kind of came down to the 11th hour. They were trying to get this thing ratified. The amendment had already passed, but it needed to be ratified by the states, and they didn't have enough states. They were trying to push it in at the 11th hour. In fact, they had already missed the deadline, which had been extended, and that extension was, of course, legally questionable on its own. But it's one of those things where possession is 9/10 of the law. I feel that if enough states had ratified it before it had before the second deadline had passed, and it was the law of the land, then I believe that the appeals courts would have let it stand. Instead, because it didn't get ratified, the courts went ahead and found, well, it doesn't matter because it's already it's moot, it's already expired. So we can't do this. And I know I'm sure that a lot of people don't agree with the Equal Rights Amendment in principle, but for me, I don't really have a problem with it. I don't know that it's completely necessary, because all the forms of discrimination that are protected by the ERA are also codified in other statutes. So from that perspective, I think, why not just do it? And we kind of explore that, as you can imagine, if you know my devious mind at all. One of the biggest problems that a lot of women had with the ERA, and some men too, a lot of men, was they didn't want their daughters to have to register for selective service. So although there wasn't a draft, Carter reinstituted the selective service, which gave us the roles so that we could create a draft. And all men, that when they turned 18, they had X number of weeks, I can't remember what it was, to get down to the selective service, go down to the post office, basically fill out a form and let them know that you were ready to go shoot communists should the need arise. And the worry was that if we passed the ERA, that your daughters are going to have to sign that same form, and how the hell are we going to do that? And how can we, if we have equal access to the draft, then statistically you're going to have a fighting force of 50% women, 50% men. And I love women very much. I do not want 50% of my military to be women, unless we start getting some kind of I'm just going to stop walking down that road. And I'm just going to say, I don't think, even in the most highly mobilized militaries. In fact, maybe I'll look into this and see what does Israel look like when it comes to percentages. But it's untenable, I think, to have that. So if you have an equal rights amendment and you have a draft, how do you deal with that political situation? And hint, that might come up in the second book and third, and that might be a recurring thing to look out for. But yeah, that was really, I started out with a short story, and it kind of grew and it kind of grew, and I reached out to James at some point, and I remember saying, hey, look, I got this short story and I really want to do something with it. Do you have any advice? And his advice was basically, yes, but hold on, I've got a lot of stuff going on, but I will swing around and pick you up. And he did. We actually, Monroe Doctrine 4 was not our first collaborative project. We had actually started one before that, that maybe we'll get back to at some point, but I think I got about 20,000, 30,000 words into it. And it took place starting in 1980, but then it really took off in around 84 when Ronald Reagan wins re-election. So yeah, we started that, but right then, while I was working on that, he was actually working with Sam, one of our other mentees, on Monroe Doctrine 4. But Sam, as I think if you guys have been following us, he got deployed. He got sent overseas, and so that kind of broke down a little bit. He wasn't able to keep easy hours. He was really busy. He's a historian in the Army. And so that just kind of fell apart. So he asked me if I wanted to come on and pick that up, and I did. And then when we finished with Volume 5, I said, hey, look, I've got this thing. I've got a manuscript. I know it's a dog, but I know what's wrong with it, and I know that we can fix it. And so when he handed it over to Miranda, she saw what we saw, which was, oh yeah, this is it's not structured right. We have to move some stuff around, and so it was a great process. I mean, it's hard because when you spend so much time working on something and someone tells you, oh well, we've got to fix it, even if you know that it's wrong, even if you know that it can be improved and it must be improved, there's still a bit of pride that stings when that happens. So but you know what, she was right almost every time. There was one time that we're not going to talk about where I went ahead and agreed with her, but I still think I was right. But we'll leave that between she and I. But anyway, again, this video is to say thank you to everybody that helped work on this thing, and to just let you know how much I really appreciate the effort and the work that you guys did to help me get here, and as much as anything, just tolerating me on social media. Speaking of which, last thing, and then I'm going to let you go. We have a community over on Twitter, and I know a lot of you guys don't like Twitter. You think it's toxic, and it can be. It can be. My new philosophy on Twitter is that it is as toxic as you want it to be. You just got to curate your feed and pay attention to it. Anyway, we've got a community over there of some young up-and-coming military fiction writers. Most of us that are over there right now are all doing Cold War Goes Hot military fiction. So basically my story, but at different points of time. It's really fun because there's only so many different that our books are always going to have these scenes that are very similar. You're almost always going to have, the submarine hunts the aircraft carrier. And so it's really fun to watch how everybody does these just slightly differently. But we've got readers over there too. Rick and Mark from Soviet Endgame and James's groups, they're over there with us. And I just think it's a lot of fun. So I'll leave a link in the description, and hopefully I'll see you guys over there. Anyway, thanks so much for watching the video and for everything you guys have done for me. I really appreciate it. We had the #1 book in alternative history, and I couldn't have done it without you. Thanks a lot.